Thank you so much, Ruchika, for joining us. It's great to have you on board. Uh, why don't you introduce yourself rather than I doing the honors?
Thank you, Sandeep, for inviting me. I think being on Sensory Moments and sharing what I know best over the years is my honor too. And it's just a way of integrating it and inspiring more people. So I'm Ruchika Malhotra Bhatiani. I started as a product developer about 2 decades back with PepsiCo. But very soon I understood that sensory and consumer was at the heart of all developments. So to become an excellent product developer, you need to have your sensory and consumer skills, insight skills in place. And therefore, for about the next 1 decade or more, I was doing sensory and consumer insights with GlaxoSmithKline, which was my next role. And I think right from the sensory tasting rooms to the smallest places, villages in India, to the poshest places in India or even in UK and US, I got the opportunity to understand consumers. I think that experience not only changed me as a human and as a professional both. Post that, I took on the product development and consumer and sensory science role both because they integrate extremely well. I moved on to Unilever and was leading the R&D for foods and ice creams for South Asia. And in my recent role, I am leading the R&D for Pernod India. And that's about me.
So all these categories that you worked in, what's the favorite category that you would like to work on?
See, when I do like a count of by technical categorization, I think I worked on about 14 plus categories. It's very, very difficult to choose favorites, Sandeep. Whether when you say FMCG, when it was Lay's, nothing is as FMCG as, Lay's. And it is for indulgence, it's for impulse, that moment of enjoyment. But so much science goes behind it. I think that taught me something completely different. When it was Horlicks or Eno or Crocin, it is about a purpose to say that good sensory is actually responsible for good compliance of the product because they are for health benefits. And if you don't have an acceptable sensory profile, you will not find compliance and consistency in the products, and it will be a different purpose. And obviously, in foods and ice creams, it was back to something similar, like what was the expectation in Lay's, but foods and ice creams being responsibly serving, whether it's salt proportions, whether it's other preservatives, etc., keeping them in limitations and still serving the most favorable sensory profiles was my learning. And here, even in the alcobev industry, I think they are expensive products. People are very staunch judges of the product quality of the product experience. So I think picking favorites is very tough, but each one taught me a different thing.
So I'm reading that while you say that it's tough, but you seem to have some affiliation for lace more than anything else.
Yeah, I always say I think the first job, the first experience, which is your foundation, I think has a special resonance. And therefore, because when you refer back, Clays, yes, of course, I thought one from at that time, their focus on product quality assessment or product quality benchmarking versus competitors, interplant, what different plants were manufacturing, getting the right sensory profile. Sometimes there were about 20 launches happening. And if
Oh,
you were
wow.
doing a launch for Pujo, in the eastern part of the country, you had to understand the consumer on what their expectation is from a authentic sensory profile and then deliver it in that product, right? But there were flavors like the chaat street flavors we were doing that day, which is like the papdi chaat and the golgappas. Getting that dish experience and converting it into the product was something a great learning. We used to run the master chef process that time
Wow.
when some leading master chefs from across the globe, from India, would come create the dishes. The flavor houses would do head space captures, would do the sensory profile. So much work on paper before they could actually develop their toolkits, their flavors, and just the even the concept of turf, which is total unduplicated reach and frequency, on saying, I would keep testing the masala, and masala was India's favorite palette, but taking the courage to launch an American sour cream and onion, which catered to a different sensory profile, or a Spanish tomato tango. I think that holistic sensory and consumer experience is what was laid in my foundations. And I think all the other companies, whether it is GSK or Unilever or Pernod, I think they focus on it equally. But yeah, my first references always go back to Frito-Lay and PepsiCo.
You use the word compliance. From compliance to development, how does sensory play a role? What all does sensory do?
Yeah, so I think sensory, it's gaining more and more importance, and people are understanding it are trying to understand it fairly well today. But I think in the end-to-end product lifecycle management, sensory plays a very important role. And I just take a step back and say there's so much effort that goes, and I understand all in process design, in product design, in clinical claims, or the claims in general about the product. What does the consumer ultimately judge the product on? He cannot go and do an analytical testing of your product, right? He will not have insights on whether your product was extruded or spray dried or crystal freeze dried, etc., etc. Their judgment criteria is sensory, and a wide scope of sensory, not just limited to the product, but even packaging. So I think right from when you choose what to develop, right, the desired consumer experience, so the consumer insight on what to develop, and taking their language and converting it into the technical brief for the product developer. Then the stage of product development, where it is not a literal algorithm, right? They said, please add highest of this product, or the highest of this sensory note. The ingredients don't work like that. How they reflect in the product would be very different. And therefore, the right product design to meet consumer expectations. And then validating it, that the iterations that you go through will need a lot of sensory. With your expert sensory panels, go and validate that with the products, and depending on the objective of the project, in multiple of ways. And once you have the right product, I think where sensory plays an extremely critical role is in quality control and consistency. People stick to brands when they are high quality and they are consistent. That's the power of a strong brand. And I think sensory has a very, very important role to play. And with time, when the trends change on, let's say things like sugar or salt, or trends change on regulatory aspects, product optimization, sensory will play a very, very important role is there, because that time it becomes even more tricky. You have a very well-established product, you have a well-established brand. People tell me innovation is tough. I tell them restage or renovation is even more tough, because you have more to lose than you have to gain in an innovation. And therefore, when we product optimize for fine-tuning product formulations for different reasons, I think a very, very strong role to play there. Competitive analysis. We all are staying in a highly competitive environment, and therefore healthy competition. And you have all the companies have some great competitors around them, but your advantage or your differentiation comes from knowing your competition. How do you judge that? They're not going to give you your formulation sheets in your hands, right? You will have to do a sensory analysis, obviously tied up with other analytical tools, but sensory is a very, very good indicator to say, what's the competition doing? How do I differentiate versus the competition? And once you have all the benefits of your product, or a little, a chink in the armor about your competition, product communication, is a very, very important role. There are so many sensory claims to say, whether it's the 9 out of 10 people, 90% people like it, the best loved product in market. I think the claims regulation have become tighter, and you really need to prove it through your expert or consumer sensory. And therefore, I think putting all these together, yeah, and in the recent times, I also believe sustainability, right? Sustainability of when you choose to do sustainable ingredients, etc., and integrate them. It's a sub-umbrella of the product optimization, but how sustainability is becoming more and more important.
Sure.
Industry will have a role to play there. And putting all these things together, right, from what to create, what's my competition doing, what do I develop, at what cost and quality, I think it is a key enabler of overall strategic decision making. And that's how I see the role of sensory and consumer coming together.
Wonderful answer. Picking up a thread which you said about consistency, and that's I had not reflected on how important for a consumer consistency is. And there have been examples of Atta which have disappeared, Atta brands which have disappeared from the market, which were not consistent, because especially in a category like rotis, you want the rotis to come same every time. You don't want them to be different every week or every second week. How difficult it is when you deal with brands like Horlicks and Bonvita, different factories, to deliver consistent products across India. India is a complicated country.
Yeah, so one, I think the example of Atta that you gave could be rooted in two things. One, the product design itself. We understand that India is a vast country, and right now I'm referring to India. The food cooking habits and how you produce, we know, and because I worked in Unilever and close to the Annapurna brand and leading the Annapurna brand as well, atta in different parts of the country is different. Some people want to use a coarse atta, and that's how their kneading experience would be. And somebody uses a fine atta. So if that is a detail that has been missed because you miss that consumer insight, you may create a product, but you may not be able to sustain it. Countries and cities, especially the urban metros, which are great sources of business for most companies, along with, of course, the entire country, are becoming more and more cosmopolitan. So your product mix that you want to sell becomes very important. That also comes from whether it's the demographic studies, etc. So I think it could go wrong even at the product design and consumer insight level. But if it is gone because of consistency, I think with multiple factories, and I think whether small companies or big companies which have a large manufacturing footprint have to keep this challenge alive. And I think your strongest partners of sensory teams and consumer teams, who are usually central, are your quality teams. And I've also learned over the years that at the product design stage, sitting in your labs and not understanding what's happening in the factory. We had different technologies, let's say in Horlicks, that were manufacturing Horlicks. And just by experiencing, one, you were experiencing it in the lab and when you're doing your sensory testing and consumer testing. But I think each of my sensory scientists or product developers have actually understood the technology. What does it heat up to? They knew what the product tasted at time point 0 at the end of, let's say, a vacuum and dryer. What did it taste after when it was half cooked, full cooked at this parameter, higher vacuum, lower vacuum. And that gives them as sensory scientists insights. And therefore, I was saying that product development and sensory science is so integrated that it takes a lot of effort, one, at understanding the process, understanding the ingredients. If this ingredient is heated to this temperature, what are the characteristics that it will start displaying? If this ingredient is from this source, right? If it's a 2-row barley, it's a 6-row barley. If it's a what salt of iron, if it's a ferric sulfate, if it's it's a bisglycinate, what are even the micronutrients? What could it do to the product? So I think if what I simply call the -1 + 1 rule, you should understand where is it coming from. So understand your raw material, understand your process, understand your ingredients. Otherwise, you can't do good sensory. And where is it going to? It's going to the consumer, or is it going into further processing? How long the product is going to be, which is the shelf life, stability aspect of it. So I think for a sensory scientist or a consumer scientist having this holistic understanding, of course, you may not be a subject matter expert, but you will definitely rely on subject matter experts, and the more understanding you gain yourself on these processes, the better outcomes we will see. And that's the mantra behind consistency of big brands, that cross-functional collaboration, sub-functional collaboration, that everybody comes together and they understand each other's disciplines and can give constructive feedback or developmental feedback to one another on the product or the process.
I think we've interacted for quite some time, and I always hold you as the ambassador in at least in my circle for sensory. So, a short question: we've been meeting people who are not technically qualified but still are in sensory. Is it necessary to be technically qualified coming from a food science background to be in sensory and consumer science?
So thank you, first of all, Sandeep. I'm humbled by what you said. I'll give a very diplomatic answer here, okay? So in India, unlike the European countries, you have sensory science in your master's or in your bachelor's as a minor course that is integrated. While, I have worked with my colleagues from Denmark or France who have sensory science as a master's or a PhD discipline. That's by virtue of how the courses is. And I think we are not very far away from the time that even India will have those courses. So I started as a product developer, like I said, in hardcore seasoning development, product development. And at every juncture, whatever you were developing had to get into consumer test. So that was my first interface with the consumer teams and the sensory teams and the expert panels of the flavor houses or our own. But once you get into sensory, I think the opportunity is that there are many, many courses. I did upskill myself. I worked with an institute. I spent some time in CFTRI, specifically on sensory and flavor courses. I spent time with a very, very senior lady from Simrise in those days, who was an expert sensory. Chinta ma'am, she was like a mentor who taught me. So that was one form of my mentoring. But formal education from Institute for Perception, I did my courses in sensory, in statistical analysis, in consumer tests, etc. And there is self-directed learning. And so I think, and of course, then there is how you are experiencing and your curiosity to learn. So the long and short answer of it is, yes, after a food science background, even I have seen from a biotechnology background, a life sciences background, you can move into sensory science, but there should be focused efforts on upskilling in a 360-degree, self-directed learning, find a mentor. Like I had a mentor for consumer insights in RAM when I was doing technical insights. I wanted to, now after I'd done my share of, the design validation, I wanted to understand consumer and brand and be marketing agencies, etc. And I did a secondment, a formal secondment and a role in marketing insights. And Ram, who was that time the GSK Insights lead, has been PepsiCo and different companies. So find the right mentor and then find courses. You have courses from different places, from UC Davis, from institutes in India, outside. So I think that will always help. Always help with your knowledge, always help with your credibility and performance.
What to you, I wouldn't want to give the answers, so I want the answer from you. What defines a great or somebody who does well in sensory? What kind of characteristics the person has to have?
Oh, that's a tough question. So I think I will divide it into both the functional skills that the person should have,
Yeah.
as well as the personal traits the person should have, or leadership behavioral skills. I think first I'll go to the functional, obviously, which we were capturing earlier. Um, Deep understanding, theoretical to start with, and then it's all about practice, practice, practice. And you learn so much through when you run this panel. This didn't go well. They can't tell you the notes, etc. Should I reduce the threshold, increase the threshold, etc. So um, training, um, learning, understand. You have the best books on sensory science, multiple. Uh, you learn sensory science. What I was referring to earlier, you learn product science uh, of your category.
Yeah.
Sensory science is like a discipline, which is, like I say, it's mathematics. Whether you do sensory for, um, Croson, whether you do sensory for Alcopep, or you do it for healthcare products, or you do it for snacks or ice creams, those principles will not change. We know the test methodologies, whether you're doing a two or trio, whether you're doing a triangle, whether you're doing a QDA, a PCA, will stay the same. What differentiates is the category science, which is the product science. What ingredients, ingredient interaction, process interaction. And therefore, if you are a sensory scientist who understands, first step, understands the methodologies of sensory extremely well, great. After that, whatever category you are learning on, once I learned my sensory and I kept practicing, to be honest, I would just brush up on the advanced sensory skills. Even now, when I lead the R&D, it's only just keeping a keen eye on what's happening. But what you need to keep brushing up is your category science, your product science in the category that you are working. So those are the two key functional skills, I will say. Statistics really, really helps, because whatever data that you're generating, I think being able to interpret it is a very, very interpret it and then share the results, and deconstruct the results that are relevant to your marketing team, that are relevant to your product development teams, that are relevant to your regulatory teams, etc., is very important. So sensory science and consumer science fundamentals, fully expertise, product science, category science, statistics, and whatever you say, data interpretation, data communication are the key skills that I would say are important for the role. And on the behavioral or the personal traits that you should have, I think I rank curiosity as one of the biggest, which will enable you to learn the first three. But I think, I was basically an introvert. An introvert wrongly taken to say will not talk much. But I think why I said in the beginning that consumer and sensory science change me, because if I genuinely want insights, insights come from a place of empathy. Insights come from a place of understanding the motivations or the problems that our consumer or the person who we are talking to understanding. And if I don't put myself out there authentically to understand, I will not be able to get the real insight. It will be very, very superficial. And therefore, I realized that in order to derive those insights, derive those things, being your authentic self who's able to put themselves with a keen interest to actually understand. One, I wouldn't say mistake, but a faux pas that many of the people in the product industry or consumer says, we are very solution obsessed. I work in this category. This is what I'm going to do. But I think, and we place as if our product is the center of the universe for our consumers. But I think we should have the humility to understand that our product is just one thing in their big life. And therefore, when I go with the thing to just focus on that product, you will ultimately put the spotlight on that product or the category because that's your job. But I think the wider horizon to understand what role does it play, a big, small, and in some occasions it is the center of the universe, etc. I think that uh, take a step back and don't just always be, see the big picture, etc. is very, very critical. So what I'll say is curiosity to learn. I think a little detachment and humility to step back from the product or the category that you are working on, and being very, very authentic to interact and try to really understand what you are working towards is 3 skills. So it's my 3+3.
Oh, wow. So authenticity, humility, and curiosity, and obviously a passion which overrides learning the product science and the curiosity part. Because if you don't have passion, then you're not really gonna you're gonna focus more on the solution rather than on understanding all aspects of it.
Yeah, I think the passion is the fuel that we all run on. That is, it's so entrenched now that I realized I didn't even say it. But I think it's become so cliche. But I think um, passion for whatever you're doing, sensory science or anything. If there is no passion, I think we are. I feel pity. We'll miss ourselves the joy of what we've created or what we've done. So yeah, passion and purpose obviously are the bedrocks of anything.
Yeah, in fact, only when we get out of our offices do we realize. So I'm teaching a class where uh, I won't name the place, but where I found the passion to be less, and I give them examples of the cricketers who have, slogged their ass off to reach where they have, and say, look, follow your heart and follow your passion. But maybe at 21, 22 it doesn't happen, and maybe it happens later. I'm not sure how the Gen Z is wired, though to some extent we are very harsh on Gen Z because I'm not sure how we were at 21, 22, and we were wired to work hard and all. I'm not very sure on that, but that's separate discussion. We can have I think 45-minute, 50-minute discussion or an hour discussion on Gen Z. Jumping on to the next topic, I've got two broad topics to discuss with you. One is you had a varied experience, 14 categories, 4 or 5 different companies. What are the common myths around sensory in the non-sensory or non-R&D folks in different companies?
I think first I look at the positive side. It's evolving. I've seen it evolving, and different companies, different categories are on a spectrum. I would like to say you have believers and non-believers, and you have converts and everything in between. So I think sometimes I'll start with some very common on the floor ones. Some categories, and it may be true for some categories, honestly, that the target group um, is kind of, what our senior leadership or leadership or the people who are working in the company could be around. The same TG, 30 to 35, etc. There are categories. And and it's one of the current ones, right? When you evaluate products, etc. In product design, you could take a call on that this could be the product that we would want to design and deliver. There, I think, to some extent, till a shortlisting level, that's good, right? You have some expert people trained on the category from your employee base who are your target group, who physiologically, mindset-wise, etc., could be those people at the shortlisting stage. It is fine. But still, some people might want to just stop there. But there I see the unknowns are unknowns. Are you the same socioeconomic class? Does the product play the same role? Geographically, um, there are some categories, they have to be teamed with food products, etc. I may be eating very less spicy food. Somebody's food may be very oily. Some cuisines, like the South Indian cuisines, are high on tamarind and chili. And what do you pair it with, etc. I think there could be myths around that once it's done in the boardroom or in the larger room, it's over. No, I think the finesse will still come from checking with the consumer. There may be some categories which believe that, we do not stand for sensory. Sensory is only for, tasty products that are selling No, I think categories which understand this very well. And when I said compliance, for example, I'm sorry, I think someone has decided to go off. So for compliance, let's say Crocin, right? Our pain relief teams in Europe, etc., were working on pain relief. And for Crocin for children, sensory wasn't a medium to sell the product. In fact, no, you don't want children to get sick, but when they are sick, and if it's not a good tasting product, an acceptable product, the child's bitterness threshold is so low versus an adult's bitterness threshold. So you are not the TG. And if the child, after feeding a spoon of Crocin or any, antipyretic or anti-pain medicine, throws up, you are in a lurch because you don't know how much of that active pharmaceutical ingredient has gone inside you, how much has come out, and the problem is not solved. You want the fever to come down, you want the pain to come down, etc. And therefore, sensory, I thought, was very, very well understood there. Even in Pernod India, I want to tell you that it's an alcobev category, but the focus on sensory to say, because we stand for quality. So quality is paramount to the category because that is the key differentiator. And how do you maintain quality? Quality has so many aspects to it, sensory being one of it. And in the recent times, I think the focus to say, once you become like such a big player in the country, you could say, okay, now everything is safe. But there has been a reinvigorated passion to or a focus on training, there's turnaround, new people would have come, the company would have expanded. We are running a very, very dedicated program on sensory training, which Apeksha, I think when you spoke to her, she spoke about on training the folks, experts, shop floor, day to day, giving them tools and techniques for consistency. So I think very important. But yeah, these are the myths that I could take the decision on my own. Some categories do not need sensory as much as the others. Or also, let's say in some categories, and I'll just probably do a little reference to it. Okay, categories which are very, very old, and you believe that the new trends would just lap onto this category just like this. And if I do this, the category will work. No, but the sensory cues, in a way, are giving deep entrenched product benefits of functionality cues to the consumer. And if there's a certain note coming in my product, let's say a biscuity cereally note that the consumer is associating with the health and with real ingredients. And if I try to mask it with some of the, really fancy flavors, etc., sometimes understanding that the ideal product model to say that the product is expecting a certain, so the myth around, that there are some timeless classics and you need to preserve the key brand assets like you do in visual and packaging and advertising. Even sensory has some key brand assets that you don't want to tinker around too much with, or you should understand on there will be a time when I can tweak them, but this may not be the time. So I think these three myths, decisions taken in smaller groups, or the importance of sensory in one category versus the other, and just tweaking it with something like fads or trends could be some common myths that are coming to my mind right now.
Thank you. Lovely answer. We did do something on a protein drink, which is very similar to what you said. It has got a very bitter note. It, as per its core consumers, it delivers, and as the note is very bitter, it can't expand its market. But the core consumer said the bitterness is the core here, means for the core consumers, and they didn't want the bitterness to disappear. So don't mask it with chocolate, don't mask it in, keep the original as original. So
having been in the category, I know what you're referring to. Yes, which is I think critical. And again, that comes from a holistic understanding of both sensory and your consumers and your brand ethos, or what your brand narrative is around. And also, like I said, strategic decisions. In this particular case, the product, a strategic decision might not be to optimize this product, but to create a line extension.
Yeah.
So you can cater to both. So this is what will come from your sensory and consumer understanding, right?
Yeah.
That whether I want to pick this current offering and alienate my core consumers of the brand, or would I want to cater to the consumers who have different needs through a line extension or a new brand altogether?
Yeah.
So I think those are the inputs that sensory and consumer science will give even to your strategic decisions and innovation strategy.
So one of the last things that I want to pick up, and not last because we don't have enough to talk with you, but I think we should keep it in some time in mind, and it's a Sunday. Products are becoming important. There have been people who have said it's now the product age, because especially getting across to Gen Z, the more affluent Gen Zs who are on their iPhones and who are on their phones most of the time, consume media on the iPhones. It's very difficult to get across to them. And there is obviously a lack of, there's just too much in their mind. So getting the branding across to them is difficult. So the last mile of the product, what they consume, the differentiation is becoming more and more critical. What's your point of view on that?
I completely agree. In the sense that, yes, it is in the new age, not just for Gen Z, even for us. My retail shopping has decreased significantly. I am an online and a quick commerce shopper. And therefore, those days of when we were launching products and standing in the modern trade and traditional trade outlets, seeing consumer shopping behavior and consumer turning the pack and saying will they like it, etc. Those have decreased in tier one, tier two towns. I think it's still there, but I think but the shift is happening. And now, till that one point in the year or twice in a year, when you're going for some larger shopping, it's usually subscription. This is the brand that I have, and this is the sources of let's say what I'm just referring to a certain socioeconomic class or demographic. There are no ads. We can forward our ads, right? How do I see the new products? So there are ad-free movies. There are no ads only. So I think the digital media ads on Facebook, Instagram, though those have become more and more important. Influencer marketing has become more and more important. And therefore, what you communicate sensorially, and like I said, we were discussing a lot about product sensory, but how sensory, semantics, semiotics have been used in packaging, the first moment of truth for packaging, in communication, what brand colors that it stand for, if it's a red that or it's a blue or it's a gold, whatever, premiumness, white, those cues what consumer correlate to, coming in all aspects of communication, etc. But what will not change, Sandeep, I believe, is that trials could be obviously affected by all these, and just generating what we say in the pyramid of loyalty of the consumer in the customer journey. Awareness and trial are impacted by what we discussed right now, the change of media consumption, etc. But the repeat of the product is still dependent on the product, right? There are product flirtations, etc., happening, and therefore the competition even in the product has become so tough. What is your differentiation? Is it your price point? You're giving the same experience at a better price point, or maybe sometimes the price point itself is to say people see the price and they say, I think because this is a higher price item, this may be better quality. So understand those consumer motivations, but I still feel that the shift in repeats of the product have not changed, because it's still completely dependent on the product, how your packaging is, how your packaging experience is, how your product is, how your product consistency is, what right cues it's giving. So I think we should independently and in a mutually dependent ways both see how this awareness trial change uh, will impact the repeats. But I think the repeats are still product focused, and therefore I think things like sampling the products right now, etc., is become a major spend for consumers, that if they're not seeing the ad, they should experience the product itself. And that itself has become a tool, that you get these small, whether in flights, you get these small cookies, or, different things, or you get free samples along with your orders, because the product will have even a stronger role to play, I believe.
True. Means the other thing which is happening is that the brand and product consonants, which wasn't really a very hot topic till some years back or even till recently, will become more and more critical, because if your brand is on a different dimension and your product is on a different dimension, your repeats will get actually hit more, because people will remember the product. People will not remember the brand because they're not registering the brand.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's the thing. So my last question to you: what would be your advice to people who are studying food science, biotechnology? Why should they consider sensory, and what should they be doing? I know you gave some pointers to the kind of courses, but what would be a larger advice if we get any students watching this?
Yeah, so I think what I would like to advise, um, which I in general say, I think focus on your present very, very strongly, right? So whatever course that you're doing, just don't do a tick mark on that. Get complete knowledge, theoretical and practical, of the course that you are doing. And I think career journeys are very, very long. I would encourage two things. One, in your career journeys, uh, go deep and go wide, and find that right time to say, like I said, product development, sensory science, process, uh, take a step back, integrate them. And then when you lead R&Ds, etc., it goes to the realm of packaging and managing portfolio management. I'm developing one product, which is this taste, this profile. My other product needs to be differentiated. When I cannibalize, will I not? So I think in your career journeys, be okay of getting out of your comfort zone. When you've been doing for 2, 3 years, you've been doing a category, or you've been a sensory scientist or a product developer, you'll feel very comfortable. And comfort is a very cozy space. But be ready to, as soon as you have started feeling comfortable, which means it's time to get into your new growth curve. Don't after 5 years, 10 years, etc., don't get complacent about upskilling. Let's face the reality. It's a very, very competitive and ever-evolving world. What we are seeing as evolution is extremely rapid now, and therefore there should be a constant pursuit to upskill. Earlier upskilling was limited to, oh, this coding language in software engineering has changed. It's from C++, it's R and Python, and now it's AI, etc. And so many others. I think it equally applies to sensory science, consumer science, product development. Keep upskilling. Do take out time for upskilling, and get the right mentors on the way. But I think focus on your present, whatever you're doing in your current role, dip yourself, get entrenched in that, and do the best. Don't, and sometimes the mistake is, what we make is, we keep focusing on what's there. Keep an eye on the future, but enjoy your present and focus on your present. For the future, keep upskilling, constantly upskilling, and also balance your career by being deep in topics, and then taking a phase where you are understanding the width of your category, of your industry. So yeah, I think all my things come in three points. So the bundles of 3 points here again.
Maybe your birth number is 3. That's
No,
why.
it's one.
Yeah, I will just add one point to it, which I keep on telling my students, and I keep on. And somebody actually told to me, we were having an entrepreneur discussion, and the person said, "If you need help, ask." A lot of time we sit in our house or sit in our office or sit in our seat and feel sad for ourselves. If you're lost, you need help, ask. People will help you when you ask. People will not help you always saying, look, Ruchika is my mentee and I should go and ask her what she needs. But it should be driven by the person saying, look, I need help. Ask your HOD, ask your people, talk to them.
Yeah.
Then only does it work. Otherwise, it doesn't.
And thanks that you bring that up. One, I used to believe, and it's only come with time and experience and age, self-reliance is a virtue, but not always. I think it's a synergistic environment. We are dependent on one another. I think knowing the person who can help you, you cannot excel or be subject matter expert of everything. I think after a certain while, knowing the people who are really, who've done their depth job in that domain and then reaching out to them. But that also comes from a place of, again, curiosity and humility. I till date say, I am okay sounding the stupidest person in the room. If there is something that I don't understand, I will ask you, what does this mean? How does this come for? Sometimes we feel a little hesitant about, oh, if I ask this question, I might just not appear as smart. Everybody seems to be nodding their heads. The fact could be out of the 10 people, 4 more people don't understand it. So if you've not understood something, please ask, please clarify. And maybe that one answer, if it doesn't clarify, go and read about it. My dad from childhood till date is to calls me Google Core. Now maybe there are other things also. But if I have exited something knowing not knowing something, by the end, maybe most likely out of the meeting and I will read about it, or the day will not end before reading about it or a paper or downloading a scientific paper around it. Because these little nuggets only will upskill you over time. ये नहीं है कि every Sunday I am going to read this and I will get upskilled. Yes, that's a good strategy. That's part of your consistency. But I think बूंद बूंद से सागर भरता है. And therefore, stay curious, ask for help, know the right people, and keep learning.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure speaking to you. Have a great day ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you for having me on Sensory Moments.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for being part of our podcast. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. And if you like to know more about Sensory, please comment below. Till then, stay tuned for more episode of Sensory Moments.